What's up, guys, gals, and non-binary pals? Hey, it's me, your local neighborhood Coco. It's another month. That means I read more books this month. I read a lot of books this month. I read 6 books. I've technically read 7, but it's going over into March, so I'm gonna count it as a March read. I read 6 books this month. I read 5 books last month, and it's February. It's a shorter month. I kind of went a little crazy, I'm not gonna lie. The books I read were The Serpent and the Wing of Night by Carissa Broadbent, Mary by Nat Cassidy, Black AF History, The Unwhitewashed Story of America by Michael Harriot, All This Twisted Glory by Taria Mafi, Pale Blue Dot, A Vision of the Human Future in Space by Carl Sagan, and The Master Margarita, Mikhail Bulgakov. So I read 6 books. They're all kind of varying in genre. I feel like I did a pretty good job at spreading out the genre this month. Disclaimer. All of these books' opinions are subjective. Reading is subjective. If I don't like a book, but you like the book, that's cool. If I like the book and you didn't like the book, that's cool too. There's one of the books in here that I barely understood. And we'll get to that when we get to that. But with that being said, feel free to sit back, relax, figure out if you're going to pick up one of these books, or if these are one of the books that you really liked, let me know. And with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get into the first book. The first book of February I read was The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. I'm gonna be so real. I was not a huge fan of this book. I don't know quite what it is about me. I really want to enjoy a fantasy romance, but a lot of them are starting to feel really predictable and kind of copycats of A Court of Thorns and Roses. And I'm gonna be real, I wasn't a big fan of that series either. It's alright. It's about a story of a human girl who is adopted by a vampire king, and she's kind of thrown into this Hunger Games-esque trial. That's not really described why. And there she beats this other guy. His name's Rain. He's a vampire. And that's kind of where the love story is. I'm gonna be so real. This book is kind of confusing. There's points in the book where the world building of this book is good. Don't get me wrong. But there's an expectation that the reader is supposed to already know these things, despite this being the first book of the series. Like, every now and then, there will be a reference to a different type of vampire, like a mention of this different vampire, and it's like, oh, but they're evil. And you're like, why? And then you're like, oh, well, there's a war that happens between these 2 bloodlines of vampires consistently, and there's a goddess, and that's kind of why they're all fighting in this tournament to like appease the goddess or whatever so they can make a wish. Like I said, the biggest problem I have with this book is just the fact that there's so much happening, but not enough explanation for the reader to really understand. A lot of these fantasy romance novels kind of all fall along the same pipeline, if I'm being honest. Like I said, I really, really, really want to find a fantasy romance novel that I could enjoy. But they all start off with the FemMC, and usually she's a kick-ass character. She has an interesting background. Normally she's an orphan, or she has some sort of dysfunctional family that they don't really get along, whatever. And then she has to go through some sort of trial, and then that's where she meets the male MC, and it starts off with a lot of enemies to lovers. And don't get me wrong, I love enemies to lovers. But if it's an enemies to lovers to where they're just bickering all the time, which this book doesn't really do that. This book, Enemies to Lovers, is a little bit more enjoyable up until the very end. I don't really like how it twists around, but I don't know, maybe I'll read the second book, maybe it'll be better. Like, a lot of enemies to lovers tropes are just like, oh, they're gonna be enemies, but like, what if they really, really, really likes each other, and then they're gonna like kinda get closer, and then all of a sudden they're gonna break, and they're not gonna want to be together again. Again, this book was one of those where I feel like if you're gonna like it, you're gonna like it. If you liked A Court of Roses and Thorns, you'll like The Serpent and the Wing of Night. I was not like the biggest fans of the ACOTAR series. I've read up till the last book. I want to say this again. I will spite read series just because I want to see how they end. And despite me not enjoying certain aspects of a book, I want to see if there's something I will end up enjoying. Because don't get me wrong, like I said, I'm not the biggest fan of the ACOTAR series, but there are parts of it that I do enjoy. Do I think it's the best fantasy romance novel of all time? Absolutely not. And that's kind of what I'm on the search for. I want a fantasy romance novel that is gonna have me in tears. It's gonna be entertaining. There's gonna be back and forth. There's gonna be a love story that feels real, if that makes sense. Because a lot of these books, obviously, you kind of gotta get them where you can get them. It's just kind of how I feel about this book. I rated The Serpent and the Wing of Night 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. Like I said, it was just not my type of book. If it's your type of book, go ahead and pick it up and check it out. The second book I read this year was Mary by Nat Cassidy. So before I get kind of into my review of this book, I want to say one of my goals this year was to read more books that remind me of my friends. And it's kind of a selfish reason. I really want my friends to start reading more. And so one of the ways I thought maybe getting them invested in reading was to read books that make me think of their interests, make me think of them. This is one of the books that kind of made me think of a close friend of mine. Her name is Sith. She goes by Sith202 on YouTube and Twitch. She is one of my IRLs. She is one of my best friends, and I love her to death. And one day when I was scrolling through TikTok, I came across this one TikTok. I will put the creator's name. Her name is Bridget-ish. I think that's how you say her name. I've been loving her book reviews, so I've been getting a lot of my books from her, recommendations from her too. She had a video called Books That I Think Would Make Great A24 Movies. And so I'm thinking about if she really likes horror movies, or she really likes A24 films. And one of those books she recommended was Mary. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna sit and listen to it and see if it's something I would recommend for my friend to read. And it is. I definitely think this is a book that, one, would make a really cool movie, and two, I think would fit my friend very much. And so Mary is a book about a 50-year-old woman. She's almost 50, and she's kind of lived her life in an inconsequential way. She works at a bookstore. She's never been married. And she likes to just live her life normal. Well, she gets a call from her aunt from her hometown where she needs help because she's getting older and she needs help around the house and her daughter left her. As this goes on, Mary is fired from the bookstore position where she takes a notebook from, and she starts seeing things. She starts seeing women with, I'm gonna heads up now, this is a horror book. So she starts seeing women with pillowcases over their heads with blood splatter as she's like driving to the town, and like she sees this building where she calls it her memory mansion, and it's where she has like all her memories stored. And you start learning that this town isn't quite what you think it is. And it also starts off, so there's a lot going on in this book. There's cults, there's murders, there's a serial killer. Mary is definitely going through kind of mental crisis as well. But it's something where you can kind of see the change in her as she's growing as well, because she is going through her second period of menopause, and her second puberty, as some people call it. And Nat Cassidy does a wonderful job at pointing out, while he is a man, it's not quite his place to talk about the changes of a woman through menopause, but at the same time is something that he witnessed in his mom and all the other women in his life. It's something that like I've realized is honestly a really good topic for a book, especially a horror book, because menopause is seen as this like terrible thing that's gonna happen to every woman, but it happens to every woman, and we shouldn't see it as terrible or taboo. And so that's kind of what one of the baseline things happening in the book is. And then obviously there is the murders that happened. There was a serial killer that lived in the town, and as the book goes on, you kind of realize Mary isn't quite who she thinks she is. And I think that's I think it was honestly a good book. There's obviously, of course, murder. Heads up, there is animal abuse in the book. It's not heavily in the book. There's just one scene where it is. It is not as graphic as it could be. But again, this is a horror book about murder, cults, and reincarnation and ghosts. So if you're into horror movies, if you're into horror books, I think you would like this book. If you don't want something that will make you feel icky, don't read it. Yeah. I really enjoyed Mary. I gave this book a 4 out of 5 star reviews on Goodreads, and I think it's just because there's moments where I could kind of relate to Mary. I could relate to her as a woman. I could relate to her as somebody who doesn't quite feel like they belong, and that's something I feel like Mary goes through a lot in the series. But also there's points where you're like, oh, maybe I don't relate to Mary. She's kind of doing some weird shit. Again, I would recommend this book if you're into horror, if you're into A24 movies. It was really good. And Sith, if you're watching this, I would highly recommend this book to you too. And if you want, I bought it on Audible. You can use it off there. But anyways, the third book I read this year was Black AF History, The Unwhitewashed Story of America by Michael Harriot. Now, I'm sure it's very clear I am a white woman behind the screen. So, of course, take most of what I say in this review and prefer black voices over mine because it's their story, not mine. However, I want to make one thing incredibly clear. Even in the year of 2024, we have an incredible amount of racism and we still have slavery. And I'm sure you're thinking, what do you mean by that, Coco? Well, let me read you the 13th Amendment, okay? And I want to point out this is something Michael Harriot points out in his book as well. The 13th Amendment says, Section 1, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the parties shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subjugated to their jurisdiction. I want you to think about that phrase, except as a punishment for crime. I want you to realize that a lot of the things that we use in modern America is used and made by slave labor. And that slave labor is the United States prison system. And before you get on to me saying shit like, oh, well, the prison system is here to help us, to stop those nasty criminals. I want you to think about the statistics of the average prison system. I want you to look at the statistics of average crime rates and then come back to me and have that conversation. We should not be using free human labor. I don't care what happened. Most of these people in the prison system are there simply because A, they didn't pay their taxes. Who gives a shit? Or B, they had a gram of weed on them. Who gives a shit? Or C, who gives a shit? If they're in there for something extreme, like rape, murder, assault, then fuck them, I guess, yes. But if they're in there for a simple fucking existing as a person in a country that is completely deteriorating at an incredible rate, who cares? We have one of the largest prison systems in the world. We have one of the largest incarceration rates in the world. Do you think the people who are going into the prison system now are getting any form of help to turn their lives around? No, they're being thrown out there just so they can come back into the prison system and make more license plates, make more clothes, go work in factories for free, be injured in those factories for free. And I don't think that's incredibly fair, especially because a lot of the time prisoners will leave the prison system. And even if they, let's say, get themselves clean, they're going to struggle to find a job because they have a prison sentence on them. They have a felony sentence on them. And on top of that, they won't be able to vote anymore. So not only are they getting taxed, but they are no longer allowed to use their voices to vote. But I digress on that point. I want to point out that this book does a phenomenal job at not only telling Black history and American history in an unfiltered way, it does an incredible job with where Michael Harriot points out his firsthand encounters and his firsthand stories. He's able to tell the stories of his grandma, his aunties, everybody in his life. he's able to connect those into ways within the story for America to be more personal as well. Because especially as for me as a white person, I grew up in an incredibly small town. I grew up in the South. The education system that I had growing up, as far as history goes, was lack there none. I'm going to be so honest. It was so pick and point to the point for most of the American history that I was taught that there were certain things I didn't know. I didn't know who Malcolm X was. All I knew about Rosa Parks is she sat on a bus. I knew who Martin Luther King was because we got a day off of school. I was taught so little about the Black experience in America, and that's partially just due to where I was raised. And especially now where there is a huge argument over critical race theory in schools and how harmful it is for the white mind because their history is going to be erased. Do you know who funds most of the history books for American students? It is not the white liberal. It is the Daughters of the Confederacy, a known white nationalist hate group funds the majority of the history books in America. I want you to let that sink in. These are all, of course, topics that I learned from this book, from Black AF history. If you can't look at modern day America and not see what's wrong with it, then I truly want to know what the ignorance of your life is like. I truly want to know. I want to know how you can have conversations with people around you and not see, oh, maybe that's why. Never mind. I know I kind of steered away from the conversation of the book, but this is a book that is going to make you upset. It's going to make you upset for the right reasons. Black AF history was a phenomenal read. I love how witty Michael was. I loved how at the end of every chapter, he had a little question section. You know how like when you're reading a textbook and there's like the assignments at the end of the book? It was kind of like that. Well, one of the questions was, how many foreign agents did the FBI eventually find in the civil rights movement? A, none, B, zilch, C, nada, or D, less than one. This book also does a wonderful job at pointing out how early on in American history, when the pilgrims, the cool pilgrims who did nothing wrong besides not know how to farm, came to a land and were starving and then went to the Indians to ask for welfare. Is that not what they did? Did they not ask for welfare? And this book, again, does a wonderful job at pointing out the blanks in American history, the parts of American history that we were barely taught in school. One of those things I learned from this book was, did you know the church bombing in Alabama wasn't the only one where the 4 little girls died? There's more. Birmingham, Alabama was once called Bombingham, Alabama, because of how much white people were bombing Black neighborhoods. The only thing I do wish she kind of touched base on was the Tulsa race riot, because as somebody who's from Oklahoma, this was something I was not taught about in school. In my home state, where Black Wall Street was, something I was never taught about in school, never even thought to encourage the fact that there was a huge economy in Tulsa, of all places, for the Black community. And you know what happened? White people bombed it, destroyed it. I am not going to go too deep into this book because I want you all to read it. Black AF History is going to be getting a 5-star review. I genuinely love this book, and I think, again, everybody should read it. The 4th book I read this month was All This Twisted Glory by Tahira Mafi. So this is the 3rd book of the Woven Kingdom series. I really have been enjoying this series an awful lot. I originally thought this was going to be a trilogy when I first picked up this series, and I started getting closer to the end of the book, and I'm like, wait a minute, this doesn't feel like it's wrapping up. This doesn't feel like it's wrapping up. And it's not, because there's going to be a 4th book. And my God, thank God, because I started to legit panic towards the end. The only real complaint I have for this series is that it ends on like the weirdest cliffhangers, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's definitely kind of, it could be better. I really like the banter between Kamran, the king, and Miss Huda a lot throughout the book. I could tell, I think, at least my theory is that it's clearly wrapping up to them being their own endgame because of how their banter is. It's a lot of like, I don't understand how people can be around you. And so it might be like a little bit more of a enemies to lovers on that side too. I do wish, however, Eliza was more upfront with Cyrus in this book, because in the prior book, she was very much in his face a lot. She was very much like telling him how it is and how she wants her stuff to be. But in this book, she seemed a little bit more frightened, and she didn't really feel like she wanted to confront him on things. And so I don't know how I felt about that. It felt really, their relationship felt really to the side of this book versus the four who were coming to try and rescue Eliza. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because again, there's going to be a fourth book. And since this is a book series, it might be a little harder for me to review the whole series just because of that. But it's not necessarily like a bad thing either. It's just me telling you guys to go read this book series. I really enjoy it. It's a really sweet enemies to lovers. I don't know if it's considered young adult. I don't really know what separates young adult from regular books, but I think it's a really good book series. I heavily recommend. I will say towards the end of the book, like I said, it started getting a little rough. I started getting a little anxious. It started becoming a lot more, it didn't feel so cohesive as the rest of the series did. It felt a little rushed, if I'm being honest. And I don't think that's the author's fault at all. I think it's just deadlines being deadlines. But it did feel a little rushed, so I'm hoping that the next book doesn't feel this way. However, I did really like the first two books, and I really find all the characters charming. I find Eliza to be a very interesting main protagonist. I really like Cyrus a lot. I really like Miss Huda. Miss Huda is one of my favorite characters. She's so cunty. I love it. I really just I'm hoping that the next book is really good. Like I said, this is probably not my favorite book of the series. I really like the second book more than this one, but maybe the fourth book will change my mind. And so with that being said, I know I didn't review this one too heavy, and that's just because it is a series. Maybe once the last book is out, I will review the whole series as a whole. I'm thinking about doing something similar to Mistborn once I finish Mistborn, but I'm gonna go ahead and rate All This Twisted Glory a 4-star review, just because it is a good book series. I've been heavily enjoying it. It's just not my favorite one of the series, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But yeah, I still would recommend this Woven Kingdom series. Heavily recommend. I think it's been a really fun journey. The 5th book I read this year was Pale Blue Dot: A Vision of the Human Future in Space by Carl Sagan. Now, kind of a little whiplash, I'm sorry, but I really love Carl Sagan. He's one of my favorite, people of history, I guess is a good way of putting it. I really enjoyed watching his Cosmos series when I was a teenager. It really changed a lot of my perspective of the world and a lot of my perspective of just being a person and living in the world that we do now. And Pale Blue Dot does a wonderful job at doing that as well. One thing I really enjoy about Carl Sagan's writing is that it's obviously very scientific. He's pointing out ways, especially in this book, how life could exist on other planets, or maybe how humans can exist on other planets, and what it would take to bring life to Mars, or maybe what was life like on Venus. But it's all scientific, but there's a little bit of philosophy with it. And that's one thing I really like about Carl Sagan, is that he doesn't just spew facts, and he's not like, ooh, this is the only way things can exist in the world. He points out it with multiple perspectives to it. And he's like, he doesn't bash anybody else's ideals of the world. He just simply says they might be right, but they also might understand that there is a greater whole that maybe somebody's god of their religion created. And then he also connects to space being the grand frontier that it is, and how ancient civilizations saw it as something holy. And even now, you can go outside and look at space. You can look at the sky, look at the night sky, look at the day sky, and there's still something comforting and fragile to it that I feel like almost every human can relate to. And it's just because we all share the same sky, we all share the same planet. And one thing about Pale Blue Dot is it has one of the best soliloquies of all time in it. And it's, if you've never heard it, I will probably link a video of Carl Sagan doing the Pale Blue Dot soliloquy under the video, just because I wholly think that's something that we should all take a sit back and listen to. If you don't know what the Pale Blue Dot is, I know I've rambled on this long and I haven't really explained what it is. The pale blue dot is clearly Earth, and When the Voyager expedition was off into space, Carl Sagan asked if it could turn around and take a picture of Earth just for 1 second while it was flying back all the way over by Saturn. And they initially thought maybe nothing would come of it. It's gonna shoot back, it is gonna be darkness. But instead, it was able to be reflected in this tiny little beam, this tiny little dot, and that is Earth. And when you take that picture into account, when you look at that picture, it's extremely humbling because everything we know is in that dot. Sure, we're living, we're learning the universe around us, but we don't go out there. We're only here. I'm pretending to be an anime girl on the internet on this pale blue dot. I go to work every day on this pale blue dot. I build relationships. I build families. I build discomforts on this pale blue dot. This is our life. This is where we live. So far, there's currently only one. To be able to sit back and see that perspective, because yes, we can always discuss about climate change. We can always discuss about the ways of the future and what can come, and whether it's something catastrophic, something exciting, something fundamental. But at the end of the day, it's all here. Everything we know is here. That's something that's always kind of really humbling for me, and it helps me personally, just so I can take a step back and know that yes, we're all humans, but we're all humans sharing the same world, and we're all humans that all need to sit and get along and find ways to better ourselves so we can better the world and better the universe. And it also discusses a lot about humans' role in the universe, whether or not are we the only life in the universe. Could we be? We don't know. Could there be another civilization millions of light years away that are far more advanced than us? Probably. Could there be another civilization further away that's far less civilized than us? Probably. But we don't know. And that's something that's incredibly fundamental about space exploration. If you don't know who Carl Sagan is, just take a step back, learn a little bit about him. I do truly believe that he is one of the few people you can look on and see the good he brought into the world. Heavily recommend reading anything by Carl Sagan. It doesn't have to be Pale Blue Dot. It could be Cosmos. In fact, you don't even have to read it. You could go watch his TV series Cosmos, or listen to any of his speeches, or read any of his papers. He's just a phenomenal human. I really love Carl Sagan. I'm gonna go ahead and rate this a 5 out of 5 because surprise, this is not the first time I've read Pale Blue Dot. The first time I read this, I was 13 years old. And while I didn't quite understand a lot of the more scientific side of things at that time, I understood the philosophical side of it. Philosophical side. I highly recommend it. I love him. I love Carl Sagan. I love this book. So yeah. The 6th book I read this year was The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. This book is definitely kind of a harder read, and not a harder read as in there's something that's a little uncomfortable about it. It's a hard read as in it's a skill issue for me. I knew going into this book that it was kind of a harder read in general, but I wanted to challenge myself with it and be able to see how well I picked up on it. It's definitely a book I'm gonna have to reread, so maybe I'll do another review in the future of it. I enjoyed it. There's parts where I definitely got lost. There's parts where things kind of got all over the place. Okay, this is gonna be a really weird comparison, but if you've ever seen the anime Durarara or Baccano, where there's these multiple interluding stories that kind of connect, it's also again something I feel you kind of have to sit and really pay attention to. Like I said, I think maybe again I might make this a more thorough review, something I will sit and not try to bulldoze through rather than sit and ingest it properly. I do think it was a really good book though. It was really entertaining. All the characters were really entertaining, and I listened to the audiobook version. And the person who does the narration on it, he did such a phenomenal job. It felt like I was watching an old school Disney movie in a way. The way he talked and the different voices he gave all the characters. They all had like their own little personality with his voice. And I thought he did a phenomenal job. But I think next time I read it, I'm going to just read a physical copy and I'm going to like annotate it to give you an idea, a more in-depth idea of what the book is about. It's about the devil coming to Moscow, kind of wanting to see, I think it was more like he kind of wanted to vibe out. I'm not gonna lie, that's one thing I was having just a hard time picking up why. And again, remind you, this book review for this specific book is going to be a skill issue. I am not rating this book at the end just because I want to give it a proper rating once I thoroughly read it. And then you meet other cast characters as well. Like, he has kind of a band of minions that follow him around. And then there's a character named Homeless. And he has a buddy. And I think the buddy is also the master, who is, like, Margarita's lover. It's kind of like a wild thing. There's also, like, murder in it. Yes, I should add. But there's no, like, extreme acts of violence. Except for, like, murder. I kind of understood why it kept bouncing back to Pontius Pilate for some reason. So, like, it would be having, like, a normal conversation, and then out of nowhere, it would cut back to, like, the crucifixion of Jesus. And, like, they called him Yeshua, and I thought that was kind of sick. It was a very interesting perspective on that. I kind of enjoyed the bounce back to Pontius Pilate and Judas. It was an interesting perspective on like the crucifixion of Jesus and what it meant to modern day, I guess. And this is also, again, I want to add, I'm not a religious person, and this book kind of had a religious theme to it. It was just, like I said, it was kind of all over the place, and I don't want to give it a shitty review for that reason. And again, it's a book I'm going to definitely have to read in the future again, so this is going to be like a shorter review on it, just because it's a skill issue on my part. This book was way out of my league. I like went up against Cynthia right after the first gym on this one. So I'm gonna have to take a step back and come back to it in the future when I'm able to be more critical of it. So with that being said, I do recommend reading it. Tell me what you guys thought about it. Give me your opinions on the book. I would love to hear what everybody else thinks of it. But yeah, I will definitely come back, maybe in a longer format video, for a more critical review of it once I can like sit down and annotate it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys keep enjoying this type of content. Like I said, maybe there might be a more in-depth video of a book I read this month, next month, later. If there's like a book that really catches me, I think I might do like a really thorough review of it. However, if there's another book that you'd like me to read, please let me know. Also, we are doing a book club in my Discord. So if you want to participate, if you kind of just want to yap in my Discord, go ahead. I'll try to put a link in the bio. Every time I try to put links in the YouTube bio, it kind of like fucks up. But if you want to join my Discord, you can find it through Twitter or whatever, or like I said, I'll try to link it. I don't know why links never want to work. We are reading The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. And I know this is one of those books where it's like you have to read this book, I guess. So if you would like to join, if you've already read the book, but you want to yap about the book anyways, feel free to join. Come read the book with us. And with that being said, I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye. Oh wait, there's one more thing actually. I also made a second channel where you can go see my VODs. And so if you want to hop into a stream but you missed it, like right now I'm playing Persona 3 Reloaded on stream. And I know since it's kind of a story-based mode, it's kind of hard to hop in the middle of it. So if you ever want any background noise, I have 4 VODs uploaded on YouTube right now that you can go listen to and catch up to. Or by the time you watch this, you might be able to watch the whole thing. Who knows? But yeah, if you want, go check out that channel. Come check out my Twitch. Come join my Discord. And follow me on all the platforms. It's basically NeoCocoTv everywhere. And with that being said, I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye!